Hi, I'm Dax Liniere, record producer at Puzzle Factory Sound Studios, London. Today I'm breaking down my mix of the post-rock track Kursk by Majora, inspired by the events that took place on a Russian nuclear submarine and the chilling end that came for the sailors on board. I highly recommend you check out the track first to familiarize yourself, as the song plays out more like a short film with many twists and turns. Let's have a look at our master bus here. So this was actually the first track that I mixed in this new studio here, and so you'll see that there's a few bits of reshaping EQ that have happened along the way. So very first plugin we have is just a simple gain plugin, doing nothing special. After that is a bit of reshaping. Now this one here, I ended up needing to add about 2 dB at 2 kilohertz, high frequency shelf. There's a bit of a cut at around 830 hertz, about 2.5 dB. And about 2 dB cut at about 145 hertz. Now if you have a look here, the scale is actually set to 6 dB, so normally you're used to seeing it like this on my videos. So yeah, it's just some little readjustments to reshape the thing altogether. After that is followed up by the SSL G-Series bus compressor. This is actually the legacy version. I prefer the sound of this one to the newer version that they did. There's something a bit more mid-focused about this one that I just prefer for rock mixes. It just, to me, just sounds better. Let's go to one of the louder sections and you can see how much gain reduction is actually going on here. So we're talking somewhere between 1 and almost 4 dB of gain reduction, which is not a whole lot. Ratio set to 2 to 1. We've got 10 millisecond attack time and 0.1 second release. This is followed up by an instance of Slate VTM, tape saturation. I'm pushing this one relatively hard, not too much, but yeah, getting closer to 0 on this one here. This is followed up by an instance of Uhi Saturn. This is another tape simulator. So the reason that I often use two simulations of tape together is, back in the old days when we're recording to analog gear and mixing in the analog domain, the initial recording was done to tape, and then it would be mixed down to tape, and then that would then go on to the mastering. So in this way, we're actually getting 2 passes of tape, and that's what I'm looking to replicate in this situation here. This is followed up by just a simple gain plugin, nothing special there. After that comes Klanghelm SDRR. I really love this plugin. It gives some great bus saturation, and it's just a fantastic color. It's a real sleeper, this plugin. Next up is an instance of Baxter by Variety of Sound. This is an EQ that uses Baxandall curves. It's set fairly low here for the frequency, so that's 1.4 kilohertz, and there's a fairly generous boost on that. Again, that would have been me kind of coming to terms with the new mixing space and how things sounded and how they would translate. After that, we've got another bit of reshaping EQ, same sort of thing going on there. Pull a little bit of the lows. This is at 6 dB scale at the moment instead of the 12 dB you normally see. So yeah, we have a few little bumps and curves there. After that, I have this plugin. This is doing a bit of Reaper routing magic. The reason I've done this is I've actually wanted the sub-bass synth and the sub-drops to completely bypass all of this chain here. I want them to go straight into our final mastering limiter without being processed by any of these here. This is a way to keep it clean and also make sure that I can balance it directly against all the other sounds without having anything take over or pump the master bus compressor. And the last plugin in the chain is Elevate. Now this was added as the last mastering step. This would have been done after the mix was actually completed. And we can get a bit of an idea of what that's doing. Let's go to this section, say. You can see we're really only getting about 6 dB of absolute maximum of limiting there, and that's happening just on the snare peaks. So basically all of the loudness of this track has actually been achieved through the individual tracks rather than through the mastering itself. And the last plugin in the chain is just Ozone running as a dither. That's the only thing. There's no other processing going on with that one there. As you can see here, I've got 6 different room plugins running on this. The reason for this is exactly as I was saying before about having multiple different manufacturers, different takes on reverb, different takes on processing, and so you're able to get a really different sound and a sound that kind of combines a lot of different elements rather than just a single algorithm. Let's have a listen to each of those in context. As with most of my sends, I have a high-pass filter on them to make sure we're not amplifying any of those low frequencies through reverbs and dragging them out. After that, we have Tila by Signal Dust, and an instance of ear reverb. Let's grab these and turn them up nice and loud so we can hear them. This is ear reverb, the second one, so this is our room 1. Room 2 is the Eventide 2016. Here it's a very specular, very splatty sort of sound. Next up, an instance of Valhalla Room. 1.3 seconds, depth set to maximum, set to a dark chamber, and we've taken off a fair bit of top end on that as well. 13 millisecond pre-delay. Room 4, which is FabFilter Pro R. Here's a lot of low mid character there, which is something I really liked on the drums. Now the Fat Distorted Room is an instance of Pro R, followed by an instance of plus 10 dB, the compressor plugin by Boz Digital. So that's the sound as it is, and then a bit more smack, a bit more punch to it, and some EQ there to take off the top end. The cymbals are getting a bit washy. Gives it that fatter sound as well. The track ER1, this is Early Reflections, and I'm getting that using Epic Verb by Variety of Sound. A much bigger reverb here, which is Abstract Chamber by Signal Dust. And Chamber 2. Smooth random, and we're at about 2.3 seconds there. This gets used fairly judiciously throughout the track. If you remember, I've got those turned up by 12 dB so we can really hear exactly what's going on with them. Our snare plate. It's not very long, but it's got quite a lot of early reflections to it. So it's only about 0.8 of a second, 830 milliseconds. Gives a nice kind of bright splat and crack to accentuates the crack of the drum. So our floaty hall, so this is one of our 3 larger reverbs. Valhalla Vintage Verb set to smooth random and 3.3 seconds decay. About 35 milliseconds pre-delay on that as well. Another Valhalla Vintage, this one's the random space, shorter, about 2.5 seconds roughly, and a little bit shorter pre-delay. And lastly is another instance of Valhalla Room, this time using the LV426 algorithm. Let's take a look at our intro here. So there are a few sounds happening. The very first sound we hear is this film sample. Very eerie sort of sounds. This is simply running through to some reverbs. We've also got a send EQ set up on here, so it's another bit of Reaper magic. I've cut off all the top end, not of the signal itself, but just of the signal that's going to the reverb. So if we check these ones out here, we can see we've got Floaty Hall, Random Space, and LV426. All of those are being fed from channels 3 and 4. So the way this works, the send EQ here is we're EQing just to the output. So the channels 1 and 2, left and right, go in and then straight out unaffected. And then the affected signal, the filtered signal, goes to channels 3 and 4. And those, as I mentioned, are routed to these reverbs. Very next thing after that is we have these guitar swells that start to come in. Little bit of EQ here. I need to do a little rebalance on the left and right there. So the right channel was a little bit less bright than it needed to be. So just push that up on the right channel only. After that, followed up by an instance of TK delay by Tritic. Yeah, this one's, looks like this is at wet drive 0 at the moment. I would say this probably automates up. Yeah, you can see it automates up for this very last section here. Yeah, so we can see it's getting a bit more at that point. And you'll see I've done the same trick of running a send EQ here. So I didn't want any of the real highs going to those reverbs. So I've cut that off there. Then that runs out to, I've got the floaty hall, random space, LV426, the swell verb, and the swell delay, which are these two tracks here. Swell verb is, we got a bit of filter and a bit of a high frequency boost there. After that's followed up by imperial delay by Boz. It's a really cool plugin, this one here. Nothing super exciting going on this one. We got a nice ping pong half note delay there. Moderate feedback. Yeah, that's followed up by an instance of 2C Audio's Ether. It's a really cool plugin. This one's a very shimmery kind of sound, this particular preset, which I really like a lot. After that, we've got the swell delay, which is just a simple high pass filter at the front, and another instance of TK delay, which again automates up towards the end there. You can see the film sample 2 is slowly starting to come in here. It's just got, it was quite a bit of EQ, corrective EQ going on in that one. Let's have a listen to that one on its own there. And then that's running to our send EQ again, and same sort of thing going on there. And you can see it's going to the floaty hall, random space, and LV426. Here, there's lovely gentle swells going on through this part here in the guitars. There's a sub-synth at the bottom here, which is processed with a big high-frequency shelf cut of about 6.5 dB at 650 hertz, and then we've got a band cutting out at about 2K, about 4.6 dB of that. This is followed up by an instance of Pro C2. This is digging in a bit here. It's doing a fair bit of action and not huge jumps, but it's pretty much always working just to level out the signal here. After that, we follow up with our send EQ. So I'm pulling out the highs as you've seen before, but also some lows in there. I didn't want it to get too muddy with that, since there's a lot of low frequency coming from that particular source there. There's another layer here. This is a brass synth part that I added to the track just to give it a bit more of a creepy sort of sound to it. An instance of Omnisphere, and we're running a patch called Richness. Hear what that's doing there. And a little bit of EQ after that, taking out all the lows, taking out a bunch of the highs, and that is on our main track, not on the send. So that pretty much concludes our intro. We've also got this little spoken sample at the bottom here, which is going to a few reverbs. We've got a bit of EQ going on that one. A send EQ in this position, I'll talk about that in a moment. Followed up by Pro C2 doing a bit of parallel compression. And then an instance of Tokyo Dawn Labs Nova. This is a dynamic EQ. So we're pulling out about 2.7K, just really controlling those harsh sounds that are in there. Now, you'll see that the send EQ is in this particular position here, not at the very end. The other thing that's useful about using a send EQ like this is being able to take a send before and after specific effects. So I didn't want the compressed and de-essed sound to be set to the reverbs. I still wanted those to kind of pop out a little bit more. I wanted a bit more dynamics in those particular sounds. And so by placing it here, the signal path goes through this EQ first. It's then sent via this EQ to the reverbs, and after that it's then processed by these ones. We've got one last synth here. There's the synth pad at the top. Some basic high pass and a little bit of tape saturation just to round it out a little, give it a bit more organic nature. And that builds all the way up too. And we can see our reverbs, the floaty hall, random space, and LV426. Those three reverbs were very prominently used for the intro of the song to kind of set that mood. Actually, there's one more guitar here. So many parts for this, of course. Yeah, this particular song has 149 tracks in it. Also got this track here. Yeah, the little clean guitar arpeggios there. We have an instance of auto swell. I don't think this plugin's available anymore. I think the developer had planned to make a full version of this. This is the light version, which was released for free. I don't think a full version was ever completed, which is quite a shame because, as you can hear, it does some pretty great things. Just nicely takes off the front of those notes. That's followed up with our amp sim. So this is Lexstack by Poulain, which is a Bogner Ecstasy model. And then that's going into a some kind of, here we go, Brit Class A 2x12. So yeah, into a speaker cab from that point. After that, we're running into an instance of Molot. This is a really cool compressor from Tokyo Dawn Labs. This particular one, this early edition, was by Vlad Goncharov, Vlad G Sound, and he later teamed up with the Tokyo Dawn Labs guys to join the team and continue producing some fantastic plugins. Fun fact, I actually put those guys together, I introduced them. Very little going on this one, you can see. Not too much at all. Just really kind of clipping a few of the notes here and there. After that, we have an instance of Mix Saturator. You listen to this with and out. Followed up with a bunch of quite extreme EQ to get that sound and have it fitting in with all the others. One of the first things you'll hear is this notch. I'll take that out again. You can hear that just constant through there. I've cut this very narrow resonance from there because it's affecting our dynamic range. When you have a high dynamic range, things feel more alive. So we've got lots of movement in there. If you end up having something that's constantly running all the way through it, your dynamic range isn't as much. So aside from the fact that the sound is kind of annoying, it also reduces our dynamic range, which we end up with a whole lot less impact on our sounds. After that, we've got this instance of pan station. I've got this set up to do some very, very subtle panning from left to right, just to give it a little bit of movement. This is then followed up by Valhalla plate. You can see this is doing quite a bit here, 4.3 seconds. I decided for this particular sound that I wanted to put this directly on the track, insert it, rather than have it as a send. We have a 50% mix on that one there, which then runs into another reverb, which is the 2C audio ether. This one is set with a fairly low mix on this, about 21%, not very high, but it's using that very long shimmer reverb sound. This runs into Soothe, just cleaning up our lows there. You'll notice there's a few resonances in the low end there which are kind of poking out a bit. This is just keeping it all under control, running up to about 3 kilohertz there. And the last thing's another bit of EQ. This would have been in response to the rest of the mix and how it was coming together. Probably needed to pull a little bit out of there compared to the other things in the mix. Okay, so I think that is all of our intro. Yeah, that's all of our intro parts done now. So we're about to move into part 2 of the song. This is where the drums start to creep in. We've got a really gentle brushes performance at the start there, which then sweeps into the full drum kit with snares switched off. Let's listen to these guitar swells here. So first up, an instance of RX Denoiser. This track was recorded by the band themselves and mixed by me over here, and so there were a few things that needed a little bit of tidying up, including, as you can see here, a bit of noise through some of these guitar tracks. So we have 2 tracks here, they're almost identical. We'll have a look at the differences in a moment between these 2 here. The very first one, as you can see, we've got the auto swell, as you heard on the previous intro part, is kind of taking off the beginnings of the notes there. We can listen with and without. Now our first track here is running into our amp sim. which is the Bogner Ecstasy, and into the same cab. Next up, followed by MJUC by Klanghelm. So this, as you can see, is doing a whole lot of gain reduction there. This is really helping to keep up the tails of the notes. You can see the attack time here is fairly slow, but the recovery is very fast, the release is fast, and that means that the tails of all of these notes are going to be brought up and you get a lot of nice sustain out of it. This then runs into Primal Tap, which is just doing you've got a bit of a slightly different times for the left and right there. Fairly high on the mix there, more than 50%, and quite a bit of feedback. Next up, the Axis EQ. What I like about this one is that it's quite colored. It's an API style EQ. We've got about 4 dB of boost at 7.8K, about 8.5 dB at 3.5K, and a little in our low end as well, about 5 dB at a bit under 5 dB at 268 Hertz. And you can see here we've got the saturation's been pushed up a bit and the output's been brought down a little as well. After that, we have an instance of boot EQ. This one here is set up, so I've got the high frequency shelf pushing almost 3 dB there. We've got about a little bit under 3K, pushing at about 2.5 dB of that. We've got quite a lot of about 220 Hertz coming through, and this is a bit over 8 dB there. Actually, let's have a listen with these two EQs switched off, and then we can hear them switched on as well. These are followed up by an instance of Saturn. This is working fairly gently at this point here, not really pushing into it very hard. It's a bit more of an organic sort of tape sound. Then goes to basic high-pass filter, which takes out any low frequencies that might have been generated through these non-linear processes that have happened earlier in the chain. And that goes into an instance of 2C Audio's Ether. Again, almost 30% mix on that one for a shimmer preset. We're also sending that to the Floaty Hall and to the LV426, which is the Valhalla Room algorithm. What the astute of you will notice is that this track is duplicated. It's a DI track. One of them has been sent to the amp sim and one of them has not been sent to the amp sim, instead going straight through a few other things. So let's have a listen to those. So we've got the same auto swell going on there. Not as aggressive EQ at this stage here as on the other track. Saturn's giving it a little bit of thickness in the low end, a bit of warmth. MJUC doing a very similar sort of thing and also controlling our levels at the same time. We're then running into Nasty Delay, which has slightly different left and right delay times. And this is kind of doing a very similar thing to what Primal Tap is doing on the other track there, the one with the amp sim on it. Now, the reason that I'm doing this, why would I use two different delay plugins when I could simply take one and copy it to the other track and save some time? Well, the reason is every plugin manufacturer has a different way of doing things, a different ideal of what is the right way to achieve a certain sound. And because of that, all of their plugins from different manufacturers will always sound different. This is exactly what happens in the analog world. And one of the things that we really miss out on, well, a lot of people miss out on compared to the old days when we would be working in a studio that has, instead of 50 of one particular brand of compressor or reverb or whatever, they've got one of this brand and one of that brand and this and that and all of these different things. And the hardware, just like the plugins, their developers have a different ethos on how they think things should be made and what's the right way of doing them. And because of that, they all have a very different tonal characters. And that's something that we can integrate into our mixes in the box if we just think about how we can use different plugins to achieve similar roles. Next up, we've got an instance of FabFilter Pro R. This is running a very long reverb, and we're a bit more than 50% mix on that one, so this is quite a wet sound as well. Then followed up by another reverb. This is the shimmer preset in Ether. Very low mix on this one, about 12.5%. And just a bit of gain staging there, bringing the whole thing up. And that's lastly followed by some corrective EQ. Let's have a listen to what's going on with this one. You can see that there is a bit of EQ on the sides that is different from the main stereo EQ. So we're getting a lot more width on the highs and also around here at about 620 Hertz. We're boosting about 5 dB of that, so fairly significant boost on the sides there. And that one runs to LV426. The next part that comes in, I believe, is this clean guitar 1 part here. So the amp sim I've chosen for this one is a bit of an unusual one. This is Soft Amp PSA by the developer AXP. You can see we've got the EQ section here, which is working as our speaker simulation, and a little bit of drive going on there. You can see a bit of soft clipping action happening there. It's not a lot going on, but gives it a nice, really nice sort of sound. After that, we have Saturn for our lovely tape sounds, followed up by the UAD 1176LN. Pulling around about between 0 and about 4 dB of gain reduction on that one there. Next up, I have an instance of Nova. This is doing some dynamic EQ to take care of a bit of a resonance we had at, where was that, about 300 Hertz there. And there's another one that's set up for about 560 Hertz, just to make sure nothing gets too over the top there. These then go into a couple instances of Echo Boy. Right, so the first one up is this wobbly one. So that one's really just giving us mostly the bit of a wobbly sort of sound. This is followed by the main delay. This then runs into MJUC. Doing a bit of overall leveling there. Now you see that the needle's only really moving about 1 dB from -2, maybe up to about -4. So it's doing between 1 and 2 dB of gain reduction just to level it out there. After that is an instance of Pro C2, which is doing some parallel compression just to pull up some of the low-end detail and make it nice and clear. And then this EQ here just to pull out that notch, which is at 2.7K. It runs into room 0, room 1, tiny bit of room 3, little bit of room 4, chamber, and the random space. There's quite a bit on that one there. Next guitar to come in is the dotted 8th track. So first up we're using the amp sim. I'm using Soft Amp PSA this time more as a pedal, then runs into Lexstack, into TPA1, which is the Ignite Amps Tube Power Amplifier plugin. Really love that thing. And into our impulse response cabinet. This one has quite a few things going on with it. We've got a bit of a high pass there, a notch around here to cut that out, clean that up a little bit. After that, we move on to Saturn, which is adding a bit of warmth with the tape saturation setting. C2 for a bit of parallel compression to bring up some of the low-level detail. With Nova, I've given a fairly large boost here at about 166 Hertz, but it does have the dynamic band there, so when the notes do come through that are quite loud in those sections there, when the lower notes are played, it does pull that back a little bit. And you can see we've got a bit of control going on at about 440 Hertz as well. After that, an instance of suppressor. This is taking out a very sharp notch. Also takes a bit of the sharpness out of it with this very short attack time here. Some EQ to pull out some more notches there. You can hear that constant ringing there. And a little tiny boost, about 200 Hertz, about 1.5 dB. Let's turn these two off and you can have a listen with and without. I find this way, with the EQ in there cutting out those notches, we're hearing more of what the instrument is actually playing, what the performer is playing, and less of the sympathetic resonances. Next up, a couple instances of Echo Boy. this one at dotted eighths, this one at dotted quarters, and you can see where we've got the mix time. So the dotted eighths are added, and then they go through the dotted quarters as well. Now this delay here, this is TK delay again. This is set up for reverse. You can see that the wet dry is currently set to 0. There's a moment in this song where that level increases. Just for a little bit of flavor in that part of the track. And lastly, another instance of Pro C2 parallel compression, just to bring out the detail of those delay taps there. Let's take a look at our bass. So the bass was supplied as a DI track and also as an overdrive track, which was recorded with the dark glass pedal. Let's go through that. There's a fair bit of going on the bass here throughout the song. You can see we've got quite a few tracks for it. I'll explain those as we go through the track. So first thing we'll do, let's take off a bunch of these plugins here and work through it individually. So just going to go through the bass DI on its own first. I'm going to mute that one. Cut here about 860 Hertz, 7.5 dB, is fairly narrow there, just to get rid of some of the excess honk in the bass sound. Next, followed up by my favorite bass compressor plugin, which is an old vintage plugin, if you can say such a thing, which is the Voxengo Marquee. It's pulling between about 3 and I think it gets up to maybe about -8 gain reduction there, or gain I should say. Next up, we've got some fairly radical EQ going on here. Bit of a lift in the low end there, so we've got a low frequency shelf boost at 85 Hertz, about 3.7 dB. We've got a cut at 132 Hertz, about 3.5 dB. Another at 350 Hertz, about 3.6 dB. Got a boost happening at a little under 600 Hertz, about 2.5 dB. Got a very high frequency shelf, which is doing a lot of lifting on this one, so it's as far down as 640 Hertz, and it's almost 5 dB of that. After that, we've got a bit of a boost around about 900 Hertz, I should say, and a very specific cut to take out at 957 Hertz, a resonance that I was hearing through there. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's triggered by these ones as well. After that, an instance of FabFilter Saturn. This is set up in a multi-band mode, so the low end is not actually being processed at all. So below 70 Hertz is completely through, completely clean. And then in our from 70 Hertz upwards, we've got a bit of tape warmth happening on that there. Followed again by another tape saturated. So this is Slate VTM. Not pushing too hard on that one, but just giving us a little bit of extra tape tone. This then goes into one of my favorite compressors, the 112 dB Big Blue compressor. Really love this thing. One of the things that's great about this, first of all, it's a fantastic sounding compressor, but it also has this drive section which sounds really cool on a lot of things. Very API kind of mid-range focused sort of sound, which absolutely love on these this sort of stuff. Next up is Klanghelm SDRR, which is a saturator. This one in its desk mode is a very bus-like sort of mode. And I pushed the drive a little harder on this one as well. Axis EQs giving us a bit of saturation, also a bit of a boost as well, some boosts and cuts there. So 3.2 dB up at 20K, so this is basically just kind of opening up like a very gentle shelf, giving a bit more air to it. A little bit of a cut, about 950 Hertz, and then we've got a boost about 5.6 dB at 1.4K, and yeah, as I mentioned before, a bit of saturation going on as well. Next up, some more EQ. There's a whole lot of stuff going on this one. Yeah, you can hear that's really given it quite a metallic kind of sound. The original sound didn't have a lot of top end to it, so as you've seen, there's been a few high frequency boosts there to really kind of bring that out. I think this one kind of makes one of the biggest differences. Here, there's that resonance there, just over 2.4K. Okay, so all of that is then being sent over to our bass amp track. Let's listen to that one in solo. This one I've put Pro DS at the start because there was a little bit too much string noise causing some kind of annoying sounds to happen into the amp there. So yeah, we've got that happening. Vandal there, and some EQ to shape it again. I'm running into Vandal here with its bass distortion pedal up front, and then into a bunch of fairly severe EQ in a few places there. That's a kind of cool bass sound on its own, but once it gets mixed with the other sound, it's just too much around the 500 Hertz mark, which is why I've pulled so much of it out there. And that one combines to give us this. Let's have a look at our dark glass pedal first. Yeah, fairly strong corrective EQ going on in that one. Yeah, so I didn't want any of the low end out of this particular track. When you have multiple tracks for the same source, what can happen is the low frequencies can end up fighting with each other from one track to another because they're never perfectly aligned. And so you end up getting some frequencies that are boosting each other and others that are cutting. So you can end up with a fairly muddy bottom end. So I like to make sure that certain tracks have the low end that I want and other tracks have that removed. I'm just mainly looking at either the mid-range or the mid-range and the high frequencies, which is what you can hear for this dark glass pedal track. A bit more obvious if we go over to this section without that extra bass amp track. Gives it a little bit more edge. Next, let's have a look at the processing chain for the bass bus itself. I'm using Sonox Oxford Suppressor to take out a bit of the excess string noise. After that, I'm using DC8C as a sidechain compressor. So this is being keyed by the kick drum. Basically, whenever there's an impulse from the kick drum track, it's going to pull down our bass track just by a little bit. Now, I've been able to limit that, how much it's pulling down, by adjusting the range control. It's only set to 1 dB, so the most it will ever actually compress is 1 dB. If I don't have that on there, if I have it set to completely open, there are times when the kick drum will basically overtake the bass a bit too much. We only just want a little bit of movement in there. This is making it quite a lot more bassy and a bit more lean as well. So we've got a low frequency shelf boost at about 93 Hertz, about 3.3 dB. I'll talk about those cuts in a moment actually. Over here we've got another cut to take out some of these honky sort of sounds. It's about 530 Hertz, about 7 dB. A little change here at around 645 Hertz, couple dB off that one. Fairly large notch here at 1.4K. Bit of an annoying sort of sound. And then we've got a boost, a fairly generous boost, about 3K, about 4.5, almost 5 dB there. Now, the reason I have this band over here, this one is only working on the sides. Now, so far, all you've heard is mono bass, but later in the song, I actually open it up and we get some stereo bass happening through there with some fairly wide distortion. You'll get to hear that later on. I was hearing too much around about 113 Hertz in the sides and wanted to control that, so we've got to cut it about 5.5 dB. What's important to note here is this is not affecting anything that's pan center. So the bass is right down the center for most of the track. It's only affecting certain parts of the song. Now, earlier you might have noticed that this track was kind of chopping in and out. It's because there's a gate at the start here. I've set that up just because I didn't want any low-level noise kind of poking through and being annoying, basically. And so this is cutting. We've got very fast attack, 3 milliseconds attack, very fast release, 16 milliseconds. This also helps to make sections sound very, very tight with that distortion. Here's a good example of this. So we've got there regate, which is doing our gating, as I mentioned. After that, repitch. Now I'm using this to pull it down a little bit lower there for the right channel. So you can see that's panned to there, and a little bit up on the left channel. And this is basically giving us that stereo sound. That's how we're getting that via some stereo pitch shifting with a bit of difference between left and right. That signal then runs into the Nick Crow 7170, which is a 5150 guitar amp simulator. That runs into an impulse response, which is a Vox AC30, and then just a bit of EQ to take off the top end and clean it up a little bit. Then it looks like some further EQ was added. Yeah, I'd say that would have been in reaction to how it was sitting with the other tracks. We got a bit of a boost, about 1.2K, almost a bit over 3.5 dB. Fairly gentle, broad cut, about 3.5 dB, 170 hertz. High pass filter in the sides, and also a cut in the sides at about 90 hertz as well. In this section here, it's a bit more crunch than that, a very dirty sort of sound. So that's been achieved via a send from the bass folder track. So this is actually outside of the bass folder. So the bass folder is this one all the way up to here, so these tracks here. And then there's a send from this one over to this track, which is being used in just a few places. Bit of EQ. Now I'm boosting that frequency there. I've labeled this plugin pre-EQ, so I wanted to really push that 1.3K into the amplifier sim to really get a bit more kind of crunch and grind on that one. Very dirty sort of sound. And then taking out the low end, because as I mentioned before, I don't want to have two things competing for the same frequency range. So listen to that together, actually, it might be interesting. Yeah, you can hear that low end sounds a bit cleaner, a bit clearer like that. The sub-bass synth is being processed by a couple plugins. We've got Waves R-Bass and Camel Crusher from Camel Audio. Very basic sine synth, which doesn't really cut through. Sounds cool, but it doesn't really cut through very well. The interesting thing about R-Bass is the way it works is it actually generates harmonics from the low frequencies in the upper spectrum, which allow the ear to catch onto it in a way that's different from simply EQing it. This then goes into Camel Crusher, just giving us some compression, bit of distortion there as well. So that's our bass and bass synth section done. Let's go and have a look at our effects that we've got running on the track. Now that we've had a look at what's feeding back into these ones, let's finish off this bass chain here. Another instance of Sonox suppressor. I believe this is only running through a few parts of the track. Then go into this EQ, and again this one's only running in a few places. Let's see what that one's doing, whereabouts this is doing its lifting. Yeah, you can see how that's dipping in and out. So at just a little over 1 kilohertz, about 6.5 dB of cut just for certain notes, which I felt like were just sticking out just a little bit too far. Right, and the last one is the Cooper Time Cube. You'll see that this one's wet dry control is set to 0 at the moment. This only comes in a very specific place. Let's see if we can find where that is. And this little lead bass part here. Just to give it a little bit of space around it. all the parts for this track were recorded by the band themselves. Let's have a little listen through to what we've got here. So we've got two kick mics, we've got the in and the out. Let's listen to that without its processing on it first. A lot of attack to that, a lot of splat, but not really a lot of bottom end, unfortunately. So this was addressed by a bit of EQ, obviously. We've got a fairly sizable boost there, about 80 Hertz, about 8.5 dB. Let's listen to that. Turn off and then on again. Now, that's first step. Boz Digital Gatey Weighty was added to basically gate a certain set of frequencies. And you can see them lighting up there. After that, Pro MB, this is set up as a gate again. So we're boosting those frequencies around about, centered about 72 Hertz. Then that track comes to the kick mics track, which is then processed with SDRR. Let's go over to this part here. And follow up with a bit more EQ. That mixes together with our kick out track. We've also got a sample track which is running here. Let's listen to that one. And this is mainly just to level it out and give us a nice consistent tone across all the hits, using a few different patches with that. Got a fairly sizable boost in the low end there, and reworking a bit of the attack as well, cutting it out. It's a little bit too much of the about 5.6 kilohertz, and pushing it more around the 3.1K range. That combines and comes into this plugin here called Tone Gate. It's a great old studio trick whereby you have a tone generator running generally a sine wave. This one's tuned as low as 46 Hertz. And then you put that into a gate, and then you have the gate keyed by the kick drum. So you only get the sub coming through there, the low frequency, the sine wave tone coming through whenever the kick hits. So that gives us a bigger sound basically. And that altogether sounds like this. I then decided to add on this one something I don't usually do, but felt it basically helped the whole thing along, was adding this parallel compressor track on the kick drum alone. It's actually a trick I've seen Alan Mulder do a couple times on his fantastic mixes. So we're really smacking it there. It's like almost a bit over 16 dB of gain reduction. But because of the type of compressor that it is, it's DBX style, this is really accentuating the attack of the notes, and yeah, it just gives us a lot more body and attack to it. So we have this sound. Next up, let's move on to our snares. We have a top mic and a bottom mic there. Let's switch off our processing and have a listen to those ones on their own. So we've got our low frequency cut there, high pass filter, fairly sizable boost, about 2.2K, about 5.5 dB, 5.2 dB there. Let's have a listen to those with and without actually. Then we're going to add the boot EQ, which is doing a high frequency shelf boost there, and a little tiny boost about 1.6, and maybe about 2 dB or so on at about 1.4, 1.3 kilohertz. The snare under mic is being gated from the snare top mic. So I find that I often want to gate the snare under mic, but I don't like doing it from the track itself. And the reason for that is the under mic doesn't have as much dynamic to it and can also have a lot of spill from the kick drum, which triggers the snare wires to vibrate, giving you basically a lot of false opens to the gate. So the snare under mic has simply a high pass filter, nothing magic on that one. It goes into a gate. Just to tidy it up a little bit, and then into Saturn. We've got the tape speeds turned up a little bit there and the pre-emphasis turned down, so it's kind of gently giving us a bit of low end there and a little bit of a high end cut. Together our mics sound like this. And we've got a bit of a little bit of a cut, a little bit under 120 Hertz. A little bit of sample added there. It's not the main sound, but it's just contributing to the evenness of the track. So we've got a couple samples running on that one there. Now we're going to go back a little bit to have a look at the start of the track here. At the very beginning here, he's playing with the snare wires turned off, and I wanted to accentuate that sound a little bit. Added that extra sample to it, and that has just a little bit of EQ after it, pulling out about 200 Hertz and opening up the top end with a high frequency shelf boost, about 4 and a bit dB at about 1.2K. Now, similar to what I did with the kick drum, the snare mics all run into a parallel snare compressor. This one has a gate at the start because I want it to be quite tight, and really only triggering on the main hits, not everything. Very tight, very short sound. We run to a big blue compressor, pushing up the drive a little bit there and pulling a little bit of gain reduction. The attack is set to 16 milliseconds, so it's actually giving a fair bit of space for the transient to come through before it starts to compress there, letting the punch of the drum come through first. Followed that up by an instance of decapitator for a bit of crunch. And some EQ just to finish it off. Right, and together that all sounds like this. Next up came the toms. This was an area that needed a little bit more help. So you can see I've added some sample tracks in here as well. Let's listen to them as they are. And with our samples there, just to give it a bit more attack and tone. My ethos with adding samples is that you always want to work to get the initial sound as good as it can possibly sound first. I see a lot of people try to take an average sound and sometimes even a great sound, and before they've done any work to it at all, their first reaction is to put a sample on it. Now, that doesn't really go with my kind of ethos for mixing and approaching a project. I think it's always best to try and do what you can with what you've got first, make it as good as you possibly can, and then, only then, if you need to, add a little bit of something else as the sugar on top, so to speak. Let's listen to our toms with and without effects on here. Now, the way I've got this set up, the very first plugin I've got running on these is Mix Saturator. I really like the way that thickens the tone of drums, especially on toms. It's one of my favorites for that. Because the toms needed a bit of extra work, what I've done is I've set up the tom spill gate to be triggered by the sample track. So you'll see here that these are all set to external sidechain input for that. So when the sample track plays, that's actually what's going to be opening this up. All the tom sample hits were all placed manually just to make sure they were exactly perfectly on and had the right field that matched the original performance. As I mentioned, this was something that the band had recorded themselves. So if I show you what it sounds like without the spill gate turned on. a bit too much spill coming through from the other parts of the kit. And so what I've done there is obviously set this up. I don't want to get rid of the low end. I want to keep that in. That's part of the natural sound of the drum. And that's what it sounds like when you're sitting in front of a drum kit. The low frequencies of the toms will continue to ring on for a little while, but that doesn't mean we have to put up with a spill of the top end. So we're listening to just the microphone tracks now and how they're being opened by the sample tracks. The toms are followed by a bit of EQ, pulled out about 185 Hertz there, and a bit at fairly broad cut at about 920 Hertz. Tom 2 has a bit of a low frequency boost around there. I didn't want too much of that in the first tom. Also followed with, a big notch at about 425 Hertz. And the third tom, we've got a boost again in the low mids and a bit in the upper range there for a bit more attack, about 1.8K. And we go into our mix saturator for a bit of thickness, and lastly to that same cut about 420 Hertz. I suspect that was probably a resonance in the room in which it was recorded. Let's listen to the toms all together. This time I've sent them all to a tom bus. Normally I wouldn't bother doing that, but because we had 6 separate tracks and I wanted to apply some extra effects to them, including these ones, which I'll mention in a moment, I needed to make sure there was an easy way to do that and basically a more efficient way to route it all. So with that set up like that, let's go through each of the plugins on the track. First up is Saturn. You'll see that I've turned the tape speed down a little just to give it a bit more thickness, a bit more low end. An instance of Saturn, again, nice warmth and thickness. Now this next plugin here, you'll see in some of my other videos, I talk about how I use this plugin to keep the low end of the toms in the center. So because we've got the panning done upstream of that, I can just simply put this plugin on here. However, if I was to use this plugin on the individual tracks, what I would need to do is leave the tracks themselves panned center, but then put a simple panning gain plugin before G mono bass or whatever you're using to mono sum your low frequencies. Need to put that before that plugin and then set our pan on that one. So if we set it afterwards, we'd be mono summing a mono track and then panning it to one side, which would then defeat the purpose. But since we've got it on the sum track here, we don't have to worry about any other panning stuff. This is followed up by this one here. I decided that the low end was just taking over too much and wanted to put a bit of a boost in the low mids, bit of a cut here. I suspect that this one was probably in reaction to how the toms were mixing, sitting together with all the others. After that, we've got our overheads track. So we've got a high pass filter and a cut at about 150 Hertz. That take out kind of a bit of the muddiness from the kick drum and the toms there. This is followed up by an instance of Saturn, give us that more tape sort of thicker vibe. Next up is the Olhurst Digital De-Edger released by Tokyo Dawn Labs. So I'm using this one just to keep control of some of those really high frequencies, about 3 kilohertz. When they get a bit too loud, kind of sticking out a little bit too much. It doesn't happen often, but every now and again they're just kind of taking over a bit in the overheads there. Last up is an instance of Pro Q, which looks like it's working here on some of the cymbals. I think there's a very good chance what's happened here, because these bands are not automated, there's a very good chance that I may have actually made a change to that and then decided to undo it at a later stage, which is why they're set to 0 there. It's the tiniest little boost on that side. Okay, next up is our Hats and Ride track. Just some basic EQ going on in this one. High pass filter at about 380 Hertz, that's quite high and it's taking out quite a bit. And then we've got a cut at about 210 Hertz of almost 6 dB. And we've got a cut again, just a little under 6K, about almost 4 dB, and a fairly wide Q on that one as well. Next up are our room mics. So these were MS encoded. You can see it says it here, MS front. So the very first thing we want to do is put our MS decoder on there. So I'm using Voxengo MS ED and it's set to decode mode. And that's how it was meant to sound. This is followed by an instance of FabFilter Saturn. Next up is Axis EQ. This one is set to about 60% wet, so there's a very good chance that as I was working on the track, I decided I didn't want it quite so strong, the effect of this. But rather than dialing back each one of these knobs individually, these ones would be very difficult to do to, get to that exact level. And there's also 4 knobs instead of just one. Up here, I was able to just adjust the wet-dry balance. We've got a big boost, about 11 dB at 125 Hertz, gives us that nice thick room sound. We've got about 2 dB at 930, 1.6 at 4.4K, and about 2.7 at about 7.7K. And all of those would be, at about 60% of what it's stated here. And the saturation is quite high on that as well. Next up, an instance of Pro Q. Taking out our lows so they're not competing with the direct microphones. Then we've got a very broad boost of about 4 dB at 170 Hertz. And at 1.5K we've got about a 5 dB cut. I've introduced a bit of pre-delay to the track by adding this reverb into it here. You can see we've got 100% wet and no dry. And 13 millisecond pre-delay. I've also taken a bit more of the highs off it with this control here at about 8K. From 8K up has been removed, or filtered down, I should say. Next up is this plugin called Syndo. This, I don't know that this is available anymore. This is a very unusual kind of stereo widening plugin. Let's have a listen to it with and without. Next up, we have an instance of Big Blue Compressor with the drive maxed out. You hear a really smashy sort of sound. And that is followed by an instance of Pro Q2, which is, as you can guess, taking out some of those excessive cymbals. All right, so that's the entire kit. Let's have a look at the parallel tracks that I've got going on here. First up, I've got the good old 33609. Absolutely love this plugin. In here, that's completely smashed at the moment. Total chaos. Only a little tiny bit of that's mixed in. The second parallel compressor I've got running here is Marquee 2, I should say, from Voxengo. This only comes up in the very last section of the song. And it's absolutely smashing it. And a bit of a high frequency shelf cut. Take out some of those cymbals there. Super distorted and crunchy. Mix just a little bit of that in to taste. And the last one we have is the Big Blue Compressor. Let's pull up those two plugins there. So this only comes up in this section of the song. Again, absolutely smashed. Smashed, crunchy, distorted. The drive is run to a bit over 6 dB of gain on that. Plus, as you can see, the meters are doing a whole lot. Actually, you can hear this little sound where these snares are in the final mix really comes through. Listen out for that little bit next time you have a listen to the whole track. And that's followed up by a bit of EQ for reshaping. So we've got a bit more of a boost at about 1.7, very broad, about 3.6 dB, and a cut happening about 5.5K, about 4 dB. So that really brings those mid-range frequencies forward. So those are our drum tracks. The last part of the drums is a collection of tom tracks which are recorded with a Neumann U67 and R121 by Royer ribbon microphone, and this is how we've processed those. Soothe is working to clean up around about 500 Hertz sort of mark just to keep that nice and tidy. After that, we've got an instance of Pro Q2. Lastly, followed up by Waves Low Air for a bit of extra low end on it. The next track is the POG guitars. Let's have a listen to those as their separate layers. So first up is our clean. This one is running to the amp sim, which is Lex Stack into TPA1 into our impulse response. That then passes to an EQ. Let's hear that with and without actually. After that, followed up by an instance of Molot. This is doing quite a bit here. Let's take these ones off through here. So we're slightly softening the attack, but also really bringing up the sustain of the notes. Got the knee at about 50%, so halfway to soft. 2.7 to 1 ratio, about 52 milliseconds, 53 milliseconds release, which is very quick. And our attack is very fast, running at 1 millisecond. We've also got the high pass filter set for the side chain set to about 170 Hertz. Next up, an instance of Valhalla Room. Very little of this going on, but large room, quite an increase in depth. 4.8 seconds of decay time and only about 14% mix. This kind of makes those notes sail on just a little bit longer. So about 800 Hertz, we're starting to stick out a little bit fast. We've got some dynamic EQ going on that one. It's going between up to about 7 dB of reduction at absolute most. This then runs into Tokyo Dawn Labs Kotelnikov compressor. A couple dB of gain reduction going on with that one there. We also have, in parallel with that, in concert with that, a POG track. So this one's been created, I put it together with a few different things. Let's listen to them one by one. So first up, simple high pass filter, get rid of our low end, any sub noise that might be in there. I'm using DC8C in this case for a bit of compression, just serial compression rather than any form of side chain or parallel compression. Only really pulling off a little bit, maybe half to 1 dB, very little on that one, just to kind of prepare it for the next plugin. So this is a very old plugin called Octaver. It's a pitch shifter, but it's a very kind of flawed pitch shifter. And because of that, I love what it's able to do to the sound. I've set up 2 separate instances of it here. So there's one for the left and one for the right. In Reaper, we can assign separate channels. So if we go over to this here, this one is only processing the left channel, and this one is only processing the right channel. Without. That is then running into the Native Instruments B4 organ effects plugin. Sounds like this. And that's where a lot of the sound is coming from. Into R compressor, just to pull it all together. About between 1 and 3 dB of gain reduction going on there. This then goes into the AXP Soft Amp PSA, which you've seen a couple times on this particular video. That runs into the XLN Audio RC20 Retro Color. This is giving us a bit of distortion, a little bit of noise, a little bit of wobble there as well. Runs into Olhurst Digital De-Edger, just to clean up around about 3 kilohertz, so it's getting a bit spiky. And then Pro Q2 to reshift the tone of it. A lot more bass, a lot less treble there. That's with a single tilt shift filter. And that blends together with the clean signal like this. Both of those combine on this bus track and are processed with a fair bit of EQ going on here. Make it a little bit more mid-rangey so it cuts through all of the other layers that are playing. Then it runs into Big Blue compressor. Only just tickling at this one. 2, maybe 3 dB, a little bit of 3 dB of gain reduction happening there. And the left and right sides are unlinked. You will see that the gain reduction for the two is a little bit different. So they're each following the differences that are coming up through the POG here. Helps to kind of level it out a bit more. And lastly, an instance of Q2 to just clean it up a bit more. A little bit more richness in the low end, about 3 dB boost at 220. A little bit of a cut at a bit under 1000 Hertz at about 4 dB cut there. And there's this particular notch here. Yeah, so that's atonally related to the notes that are being played, so I wanted to get rid of that. And a little bit of a high shelf cut there, just to round off the top end. Those then go to 3 delays. There's a dotted eighth note, a quarter note, and a half note reverse. So the dotted eighth sounds like this. We're doing that just with standard filter. And Echo Boy, this one here is just a bit of gain staging after it. Yeah, that dotted eighth rhythm happening there. And then quarter note delay coming through with isotope DDLA, DDLY I should say. And lastly, adding on Imperial, which then goes into G reverse delay. Tritic's TK delay also has a reverse setting, but for whatever reason I decided I wanted to use this one for it. And that all comes together to this. So one of the next tracks that comes in is this overdrive kind of wash and feedback set of sounds here. So without our effects, it sounds like this. The reshaping there, our ultra lows, and then bring up a bit of the low end there, low mids. It's high shelf boost, about 5.5 dB at 250 Hertz. This is then followed up by Uhi Satin to give us a bit more thickness on that organic sort of sound. I then opted to put this reverb straight on the track as it's one that I wanted for this very particular part and nowhere else in the song. So Narcissus is a fairly small sounding room, but then I've set the depth to maximum and then the decay time quite long as well, and the fairly large pre-delay. So it's making quite an unusual kind of reverb, using what was normally a small kind of reverb algorithm and pushing it to its limits and making it do something that was not necessarily designed for, which, yeah, gives it quite a unique sound, I think. Followed that up with this here, so I wanted to raise the highs a little bit. So we've got this high frequency shelf boost, about 3.2 dB from about 1.1K upwards. But then whenever there's too much high frequency, it's slightly dipping down, as you can see there. So we're keeping it under control, so nothing really gets too far, goes too far. And we get a bit more of that as the notes kind of continue on here. Next up, we've got a bit of EQ. I've boosted, I wanted to boost about 1.5K. Now, I decided that I wanted more of that boost in the sides than the mid. So I had this band here, and once I'd created it, I then split it using this button down here, which is normally in the center when it's set to a stereo band, and then was able to select the band after that and set it with a bit of extra gain on the sides. You can also see there's a bit of automation there just on that very first note, just to kind of really push it a bit further out there. And this is all followed up by a plugin called Pitchproof, which is giving us an octave below. The wet dry is currently set to 100% dry. Let's find a part of the song where that kind of raises up a little bit there. Let's see where we are. Oh yeah, right at the end here. Yeah, so the reverb actually cuts out altogether in that section. Let's listen to it in context here. So we get that lower sort of sound in there. This part continues again. And then a track of feedback comes up, which I wanted to combine with this wash. It just kind of sails on into this next section and kind of bridges these two parts. You hear the high frequency kind of wash coming through there. And that brings us nicely to this part of the song. So we've got the overdrive guitars here. Let's have a listen to how they're made. We've got our amp sim. This is a slightly different chain to the one we've used elsewhere. So we've got the Goldie overdrive pedal by Mockafix. This one is based on the Klon. Runs into Poulain Hybrid, which is obviously a Marshall sort of sound, into the TPA tube power amp, and into an IR for the cabinet. Got a reshaping EQ here. Taking a little bit out around 815 Hertz, a little bit at just over 1K, and then a nice boost in the low mids for the about 300 Hertz with a low shelf at about almost 4 dB. And of course our high pass filter to keep the low end nice and clean. This is followed up by Uhi's Presswerk. Really love this compressor. It's really kind of controlling those notes and keeping them pinned there where we've got a lot of things going on in the mix. I then follow that up by Molot. Listen to the way this one kind of modifies the attack of the notes. It's a magic thing that compressor does. So this is the original version, and there is a new version that's available from Tokyo Dawn Labs. Uhi Saturn gives a bit of that tape saturation. And I've actually used it. If you have a look down here, you can see there's actually a little bit of a high frequency boost going on here. I've used this EQ to get to that by increasing the pre-emphasis control. So you can see how that can really affect the sound. Restore it to how it was. After that, an instance of C2 running as parallel compression. Bringing up our low-level details. Q2 for some more subtle shaping. So left channel I've boosted about 2.5 dB at 580 Hertz. Right channel boosted about 2 dB at 3.2K. And then both of them together have this very broad boost that's achieved by using a bell band set to quite a wide Q. Almost forms like a bit of a high frequency shelf. After that, TK delay. Just a little bit of extra length on those. So the wah guitars come in through this section. Let's have a listen where they appear in the song. This is the big build up to the big breakdown, basically. Right, so let's hear what those wah guitars are doing and how I've built them. There's a bit of panning automation going on these. They're getting a little bit wider. In terms of processing, they're mostly as they were. So wah 1's got a little bit of a boost there. Wah 3 is a little bit boost elsewhere. We got a bit of an upper mid-range boost on that one. Nothing major on these. You can hear that's running then again just through to a high-pass filter just to clean up the bottom end. So we've got that one. Pretty subtle, that one. There's quite a bit of automation going on throughout this project. Lots of things happening. We've got some feedback tracks down here. Let's listen to those. Again, these are mostly as they were. Bit of EQ going on there. Let's listen. Carved out these frequencies about 1K and about 200 Hertz in the center, because they were obviously interfering with other things, probably the bass note, I would say, and a few other elements as well. And then feedback number 4, whatever reason I decided that one needed, yeah, a little bit of extra help there. Yeah, to control those high frequency resonances there. Got some synths happening down here through this section. Now this first one, as you can see, has a lot of processing going on. So there's this one here, which is very simple. Cut off some highs, cut off some lows. Simple as that. But the main synth ARPs, a lot of things going on in this one here. Let's have a listen. This is when mixing gets into sound design territory. And both of those sum together through this EQ. It looks like there's probably not much happening, maybe a few little boosts here and there throughout the song. Yeah, there's a little bit of a cut that occurs later in the song to just notch out this resonance at about just a bit over 2.1 kilohertz. So that's our initial sound. Bringing in DC8C as a compressor, so it's 3.5 to 1, about 10 millisecond attack and 50 millisecond release. I've then put transient on this, and this is a transient designer plugin by Sleepy Time Records. I think this is a free one actually, it's a pretty cool plugin. And I've pulled the attack right down, as you can see. It'll become apparent why I've done this shortly. Followed that up by RC20. Bit of distortion there, a little bit of space around it as well. Then we come to Discord. This is off at the moment, but does come on, yeah, in this section here. Kotelnikov, kind of catching those really fast things. We've got the attack set to as fast as it goes, 0.02 milliseconds. So that's 20 microseconds, extremely, extremely fast, and a very fast release on that as well. Doing a lot there to really control those transients. Back again here. Imperial delay coming in. So dotted eighth, you can hear it really moves it around left and right. Saturn, for a bit of warmth, you can see we've kind of cut off a lot of the top end there. It's gradually decreasing as the frequency increases. After that, huge moves here on Q2. Let's have a listen. Yeah, there's a lot going on this one here. So lows taken out with a low frequency shelf cut. Also then got a high pass filter, filtering things at about 670 Hertz. There's a cut at about 1K. High frequency shelf boost at about 1.6K. There's a little cut that I think it looks like it only comes in at some points because it's off at the moment. Actually, no, that might have been, there's a good chance that might have been left out. Might have put it on there at some point and then decided we didn't need that anymore. Get rid of that. And then, of course, the low-pass filter to get rid of a lot of those highs there. I should also mention there's quite a bit of gain going on here because, as you heard previously, that was fairly quiet there. Next to microshift. Now you'll see that there's actually 3 plugins here. I've moved it into there when I pulled this session up to review it, to get it ready for this video. Reaper now has effects containers, which mean you can put multiple effects into a single container and then just be able to toggle that as a single thing. What I've done here is I put a gain down plugin, so the input of that is 20 dB lower, and the output of that is 20 dB higher. So the net gain is 0, but what we've done is I've avoided overdriving this plugin. Soundtoys plugins sound fantastic. One of the things that they do really well is they model a lot of analog saturation that happens when you drive something harder. So I find that sometimes the levels I push into these plugins end up being a little bit much and it sounds a bit too crunchy for what I'm looking for. And so I'll just simply wrap them with a gain down and then gain up plugin. You can hear how that spreads the width. And then Sonic Suppressor is pulling out some of those clicky sounds there. I thought we're getting a bit incessant. Right, and together with the other one, we have this sound, which then rises to fever pitch as it gets towards the end here. Okay, those are the ARP synths. While we're here, let's have a listen to what the synth pad is doing in this part. By doing these little bits of automation in here, by cutting them all the way to silence, we get a lot tighter sound in those breaks. It's a lot punchier overall. All right, before we get on to that, let's go back to some of these over here. So there's a few little parts that come in occasionally. We've got some little Glock parts. Sparkly little things. You hear them a little bit more later. They get teased at the start here and then brought in a bit more in this section of the song here. Very unusual atonal sort of sound. It helps lend to the unsettled feeling of the song. So we've got our voice pad here, which first starts to come in a little bit earlier in the track. The Glock is simply just a high-pass filter, no other processing on that one there. This voice pad, same thing, high-pass filter, and then a little bit of satin with the tape speed turned all the way down just to round it off. You can see what it looks like normally. Here, let's have a look at the bells. So we've got these guitar harmonic things. It says bell. Sounded to me more like a guitar harmonic. And that is simply high-pass filter to get rid of some of this down here, followed by an instance of Pro C2. Set up as a limiter, so 100:1, very fast attack, pretty fast release, 40 milliseconds, and we're shaving off between about 1 and 2 dB just to kind of take off the pokiness of those. That then goes into the Eventide H910 dual harmonizer for a bit of stereo width. And off to our rooms 0, 2, 4, bit of chamber 1 and a bit of chamber 2. Underneath that we've got this E-piano track. Simply a bit of EQ on this one, so take out any lows that might have been there. We can do a little boost just under 800 Hertz, about 5.6 dB, and a little boost as well at about 4.2K. All right, while we're in this neck of the woods, let's have a look at the siren song. A little bit of corrective EQ, pull out some lows, very broad boost, about 2.4 dB, about 300 Hertz, and a little cut around a little bit under 5K, about 2.5 dB of that. Soothes doing a bit of work to kind of clean up. Let's go to some of the louder spots here. Any excessive resonances. Next up, presswork, doing a little compression there, pull things together, make sure it's all nice and tight. TDR Nova, there's a fair bit going on here, so I wanted a fairly strong boost wherever it gets a little bit quiet in the low mids. I wanted that to really be brought up. I want to make sure I had plenty of those frequencies there. But then when they're naturally in there, we want to cut those out so they're kind of balancing out basically. And similar kind of thing with the, we've got a bit of a cut going with the high frequency there. High frequency shelf, that's at about 8K and at about 4.8K as well. Next set of guitars that come in, we've got a set of some heavy guitars here. I think this is the first moment in the song where these guitars come through. Yeah, exactly. Let's have a quick listen to those. So these were supplied to me as a mic and a DI separately. So let's have a listen to our mic track first. Very little going on in that one there. I've pulled some of the super lows out of that, taken the subs out, cleaned it up, and there's a little cut at just under 1.6K to fix up a little resonance there. It's pretty minor, that particular one. Let's move over to this part of the song for this. So that's one of the layers that helps create that crushing end section there. We've got that happening, and then there's also, as I mentioned, the DI track there. Let's have a listen to what's going on that one. All right, so I've got an amp sim running on this one, which is TSE's X40, then running into the tube power amp and into a cab. That's our Brit Class A Pod 2x12. I quite like the tone of for this track. Then after that, a bit of EQ, boosting up the highs, making sure we're taking out some of the super duper lows. I do want lows in this, but not all the way down below, 26 Hertz there, so I don't want anything below that. Something you'll see here, I've inserted a phase rotator. Now, what this is doing, because this one's through an amp, and this one is the DI track, there will be a slight compensation that needs to happen between those two. So if I just solo this now, I'll play it with and without the phase rotator turned on. You can have a listen. Listen to how the low end comes together as well. Yeah, that kind of mid-range throatiness comes through a lot more, which was part of the original sounds. We then have some other tracks, similar kind of thing going on down here. Let's have a listen to those ones. So these are just as they are. These are a little bit of EQ there, so taking out some lows, a fairly broad boost, about 1.3K, kind of reshaping, giving us a lot more mid-range, and then a little cut it to about 2.7K to get rid of a resonance. Let's listen to this with and without the EQ. More aggression in that as well now. Then we're going to go over to the DI track for those same guitar parts. So first of all, we're going to Dirty Fuzz, which is a pedal sim doing obviously a fuzz guitar sort of sound. This then runs into our amp sim. The amp sim chain for this is Ignite Amps Emissary, running into TPA1 and into R-Core. So yeah, together those two parts sound like this. Okay, so you'll see that each of these 4 tracks here, which is the 2 microphone tracks for guitars 1 and 2, and then the 2 DI tracks for guitars 1 and 2, each of those has a send, which is set to 100%, so set to unity gain, 0 dB there, which is coming over to here. This is sending off to 2 separate reverbs and going to chamber 1 and a quarter note delay. The reason I've done it that way instead of having each of these on those is I want to be able to automate things without having to do it 4 times over, basically. There must have been a point at which I decided that I needed to do it that way, and so I've sent all of those to here. And this track itself is actually floated, so if you see the word master there is in red, that simply means, if you have a look, master send channels to from, basically this means it's not going to our main left and right, it's purely acting as a routing bus. And one of those channels goes to the chamber, effects channel number 8, and then one of them is going to this one, which is the delay that I've got running on there with just a little bit going on with those ones. Just make it sound a bit bigger, basically. After that, we have got Jared's lead guitar part. This is again from the DI tracks that was delivered to me. We can bypass these and have a quick look through. So we've got this time Easy Driver, which is again from Mockafix. This particular one is a model of an OCD. Then into Hybrid, the Marshall style amp simulator, TPA1, and into a cabinet as well. Have a high pass filter, then also a low frequency shelf to give us a bit more low end and thickness, and we've taken out a bit of 800 hertz and a bit over 1K. Let's have a listen. Followed up by Presswerk. It's just really kind of keeping it clamped. A few dB of gain reduction happening there. Again to Molot, not doing a huge amount in terms of gain reduction, but I really like what it does to the transients of the sound. Then we're running into Saturn. A little bit of thickness, a bit more saturation. Pro C2, which is giving us some parallel compression, bring up the low end detail, and then into Imperial delay. A little bit of an offset between the left and right channels there. And into a bunch of different reverbs. Here at the end here, we've got some extra chords that have come in. So we have the main ones, which we were looking at before. So we've guitar 1 and guitar 2, the tracks of those. There's some duplicates of those that come up with the last very heavy section of the chords. We can open that up here. You can see these appear just for the very end. There's exact duplicates of the earlier ones, just playing an extra part to layer it up. Let's have a listen with it. And that just accentuates the madness of these main chords here. Before we come to the sounds of the drowning sailors. So we have our sub-synth. Which is a bit of highs taken out. Give it that really submerged underwater kind of sound. Bit of compression to kind of hold it all together. And some send EQ for the sends that are going off there, the reverb sends, so we're not sending all the real highs or any of the real lows there. Ocean Waves sample, which is again just straight, but with the top end taken off for the reverb sends. And the operatic sample, which has Echo Boy set up with its warbly preset, making it kind of sound really unhinged, basically. And the send EQ on that one, taking off the top end to the reverbs. Let's listen through a few of the different sections here. Start off with brushes on the drums. switch to sticks with the snare wires off on the snare. This cool little section here on the drums. An 808 percussive sub-sounding bass part there. See what sort of processing's on that one. Very little, it looks like. Yeah, just taken off all the top end. Yeah, too much click basically. Let's listen through a few extra parts. Bass synth going, we've got a bunch of synth pads and the arpeggio running through here. And our overdrive guitars. Bass lead part there. That's the build up to the breakdown. Around here we introduced some more of that those voices, that ethereal voice. And this section goes and kind of builds up. It's got a few little pieces that kind of weave in and out. And I love this guitar part here, this one. So that's our the same settings as the dotted eighth guitar that you heard at the very beginning, but this one has the dotted eighths taken off. I just really like the tone that was in. I just really like the tone that this had, so I used that one for this. That section of the song opens up into this with the kind of bursts, bursting kind of parts with the chords there. And the lead part comes in here. Guitars move up an octave. At the end of this here, you'll hear the heavy lead comes through. So that was my mix for Kursk Parts 1 and 2 by Majora. Check them out online and check out some more videos at Produce Like a Pro.